watching NotesIn9.
Hello and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm Oliver Busse. Episode 205. Look Mom, no mouse used. Leverage Domino development with new tools. Today we have back Eric McCormick on the show. You already know him. He's an excellent developer. He's an IBM champion for sure he is. And he does a lot of XPages development since quite a long time too. He's a Java developer by nature, but when it comes to XPages development, he always tries to break some boundaries and expect some new territories. And he's also a customer, which is great. And because he has some critical looks on the products, and so he always tries to find ways to work better with products and solutions. And he's also building his own solutions, which is great. And what I in favor with is he's also a console lover, as I call it. He loves to type in consoles and execute scripts and automate stuff. You can find him on the web. He has an excellent blog. He is writing in, and of course he always shares everything he makes on GitHub. Today he shows us some new way of creating an XPages application from the scratch. And as the title says, without using the mouse at all, just by using a console. And for that, he will explain how he achieved that by using the Node.js runtime and another tool called Yeoman. But he will explain it better than I am able to. So without any further ado, let's go to the demo.
Hello, you're watching NotesIn9. I'm Eric McCormick. I'm here to talk to you about a couple of tools I've put together recently, both of which aim at improving some of the workflow involved in development for both Domino and XPages. Before we get there, though, I want to talk about a quick couple of things just as a lead-in and also cover contact information if you don't know who I am or you're not familiar with any of my blogging, etc. I do blog. I have a blog. This is the address. You can find me writing somewhat frequently. I go in bursts, obviously. The About page covers who I am, all the good stuff. You can hit me up by all means in the comments section. You can tweet at me. You can hit me up on the XPages Slack chat if you have any questions or you just want to talk about anything. I tend to be on there pretty regularly. And if you need access to the XPages Slack chat, you can either go out to this address here, or you can look for the nice button at the top of NotesIn9.com. Just type in your address, get your invite, and away you go. So, I have been working on XPages primarily for just over the last 5 years at my current job, and I've had the distinct honor of being named an IBM champion for the last 3. The first couple of years I spent working on XPages, I hadn't really thought of myself as a full-stack developer up to that point. I'd done a lot of freelance work in the front-end space and also had been dabbling in some custom PHP components, surprisingly not on WordPress. When I started on XPages, I started thinking a lot about what on earth do I need to learn, and that was about the first year. The second year, I got into a lot of how we go about building a better performing application on Domino or XPages. It's a topic that stuck with me throughout the entire time so far, and seeking out a better way of improving that process, not just having a better performing application, which can come down to just optimizing your API calls, but also the process by which we create our applications, kind of a personal form of automation, if you will. This is a topic that's taken off considerably in the open source community outside of just the Domino development space, and there's a guy by the name of Kent C. Dodds, who is a full-stack JavaScript, aka Node, etc. developer, and he wrote a pretty nice piece on Medium on the argument or an argument for automation. And he makes the argument that even if you spend an hour to automate a task that takes you 10 seconds, if it's one that you repeat, it is obviously worth doing. Even the process itself, if you have no net gain as far as time saved, for the effort put into automating, you at least can gain out of it what you gain from the efforts of creating that automated process, and it should be a more intensive understanding of the process thereof. Sort of the same reason some people like to blog, some people like to talk at user group conferences, etc. It helps with the ownership of that subject, in my opinion. And I really love the article he wrote, and truth be told, Mr. Dodds has done a lot of great work in open source communities and elsewhere with a lot of what I feel is lacking some days about the open source community outside of the Notes Domino sphere, where we have a pretty tight-knit group of people. If you run into each other in the virtual space, you tend to just instantly relate because everyone's been there working some issue, and who knows where that correct answer is amidst all the documentation, which may or may not cover exactly what you're looking at. So Mr. Dodds is a big, firm believer in open source contribution. Most of his projects are under what's called all contributors, which is a kind of a pet thing he put out there. But the idea being you don't have to be a master to help contribute. And he's also been pretty helpful with supporting and educating people along the way, because if he can beget some good in the world, that helps him sleep at night apparently, which is not a bad thing. All right, so if you want to get hold of me, you know where my blog is. You know where I am on Twitter. This pinned tweet definitely applies. I have a default sense of snarky sarcasm. I never mean bad by anything or anyone. If anyone has an issue with me, I'd much rather people call me a name to my face, because I think everyone would feel a lot better, truth be told. That being said, let's get on with things. The first of the two tools I'm going to talk about is what's called Generator XSP. XSP being an obvious reference to the XPages runtime. It's also how the runtime is referred to on Bluemix. And what a generator is a particular form of project which is used as kind of a hook for a tool called Yeoman. And I'll get there in a moment. But the short version is it's a tool for helping put things together. So if you go to Yeoman's site, you'll see they call it the web scaffolding tool for modern web apps. You can actually write a generator for almost anything. It doesn't have to be for anything to do with the web, technically speaking. It's a framework for writing a configuration, templating, file copying, or even just execution tool. And that's probably slightly more confusing than it should be. So I'll skip ahead. The generators that are out there cover a great amount of ground. And once it loads here, you'll see that it's actually kind of diverse. You have everything from a regular generator, Angular, which you can see is actually by the Yeoman team. You have JHipster, which you may have heard of if you've talked to myself or Declan Lynch or Dave Leedy at MWlog last year. It actually is quite interesting. It uses Spring Boot and Angular, and it is highly configurable, and it seeks to help automate a lot of the Java-based project setup that a lot of people may or may not be familiar with. There's all kinds of things out here, just a basic web app, React stuff. There's even Chrome extensions, and for the incredibly ambitious, but without much experience, there's even a generator for helping write a generator. And this is a good place to start if you're looking to start with these and aren't certain of it. This helped me kick off this generator I'm going to talk to you about. But before we do that, I'm just going to do XSP and show that you can find, yes, my name is on this page, so hooray. So, generator XSP. From the description here, you can see it's a generator scaffold out and XPages runtime compliant on disk project. So, before we go any further, if you're not familiar with the dichotomy of an on-disk project working with source control with a Domino application, as opposed to the actual, quote, binary, end quote, NSF, then you may want to pause now and go check out Dave Leedy's couple of episodes he did on using source control. Coincidentally, episode 131, if you're not familiar with how to import an on-disk project into Domino Designer, has that covered rather well at about the 34-minute mark. And I'll include these notes in my blog post once the video goes live. So, assuming you know what an on-disk project is, assuming you know how to actually work with importing one into Domino Designer, and you know how to work with the file tree involved in a Notes Domino application database file, then we can proceed. There are a couple dependencies that you'll want to have. This tool happens to run within a node context. I say it that way because you don't need to understand or quote know node in order to run the tool. The tool is exposed by an interface. It happens to be called from the command line. If you want the quick and dirty example, here's an ASCII cinema version of it. It'll link out. But it amounts to create a new directory, go into it, run the tool, and follow the prompts. That's why this is powerful. So, once it's installed, first things first, you'll want Node and its affiliated package manager. If you install Node from Node, you'll get NPM along with it. You also might want to consider, if you're planning on doing much work with Node, installing a Node version manager such as NVM, which is Unix and Unix-like compatible, so Unix, Linux, Mac, etc. N, which is purely Mac compliant, or Notest, which is probably the best at the moment I found NVM equivalent for Windows. So that'll help you swap around between versions of Node without having to care about some of the specifics. Of note, if you're not going to go that route, I recommend the LTS or long-term support version. That was on the left side of the screen of the two big green buttons on the Node webpage, which you saw me having up there just recently. So assuming you have Node and NPM on your system, all you have to do to install is, this is TAC-G for globally, which is TAC global equivalent. Also, install can be abbreviated down to just I. So npm install global yo, the base scaffolding tool, and then also this particular generator XSP. So once we have a project directory and a place to run it in, such as a wonderfully named demo app directory, all we have to do to run is yo XSP. Prompts come up, you answer them, it will perform accordingly. So, what are we going to call this app? It defaults to the title of the current working directory. It also noticed that it's also trying to ignore the hyphen case I did there. You can select, these are just some presets of what the available themes are, and it prompts for one as required. When in doubt, choose Web Standard. Bootstrap 3 would come out of the extension library. One UI is pretty much normal Domino. I also provide some boilerplate starter files for a CSS file, JavaScript file, and server-side JavaScript to be included via your theme, which extends the one you just selected in the previous question. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And now you notice that this is actually selected here, and you can use up and down arrows, you can use a spacebar to select or deselect. That was selected because globally for my user account I had used this before, so it persisted the fact that I know that extension library is a valid option for me. So when in doubt, include it. The same would be true of if I were to select, say, OpenITF Domino API. So this is no longer a primary. Would you like to use Bower for dependency management? This will default to no. Now, if you happen to say yes, it will, of course, pick up that for you and store the fact that you prefer Bower. You can say yes or no. Either way, if you don't say anything but you hit enter, you're going to take the default, which for me at this point is no. And then include npm scripts a la Dora. This is actually literally from Dora. We're just going to include it inside of a wrapped node module via single npm dependency, which is the second tool I'll get to in a bit. I'm going to say no for now because I don't want to have you sit through an install screen, but it is kind of handy, and literally it does just wrap around a Dora installation and consume it. So you see I've got a whole bunch of files created, understanding here. And literally, this creates an on-disk project file, which has named ODP in my current working directory. So ODP is what it defaults to. One of the things this can do is be configured to work with existing on-disk projects. I'll get there in a couple of minutes. Inside that on-disk project, you can see I have my plugin XML code directory, which includes, big surprise, my two types of JavaScript libraries. In resources, you'll see I have the theme, app.theme, which includes, extends Web Standard, and you can see it's referencing the app CSS, the global app JavaScript client side, and also the server side. And then it's also setting a page icon and database title for the page title. It's got the gratuitous single view untitled. This is what comes out of the box if you're to create a new NSF and do nothing with it. Web content contains faces config. Nothing in it. XSP properties. You can see it extends the extension library right here, because what we select in the actual selection screen isn't the actual value it puts here. It keys off of those and matches them. It's also doing a number of things such as aggregating resources, including Dojo, but not the app CSS or JS. You can obviously tweak this as much as you would like. It sets the theme to use, all that good stuff. Now, most of those settings out of the box are available for discussion. If you believe strongly that the out-of-the-box default settings should be something different, by all means, open up an issue on the GitHub repository or create a pull request, and if it makes perfectly good sense in that capacity of defaulting to something, quote, normal, by all means put it out there. Worst case scenario, we talk about it and we may or may not agree. So I have one XPage out of the box with this, which is a helper description XPage, which should help make sure you're not lost. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, and I think most people won't be lost if you're familiar with working with Domino and XPages. So that's a new one. Before going any further, I'd like to highlight a couple of specifics about how a generator works. I'm not going to scare you too much with the actual code of how this all works. If you're curious, I'm more than happy to explain that. But generator works by the package JSON here is the descriptor for where to start for this type of a package. Inside generators, you'll see that there are a bunch of what are called subgenerators. There's the main app, which is the default one, which you saw, and then there are others. Each subgenerator contains an index JavaScript file, and you can see that that is what is the instruction set of what to execute. It takes templates out of the template file, which are used with Express.js style syntax for variables and conditions. So that's how it performs its calculations of whether or not or what to update. This usage file is used to help with the help screen. So if we type yo xsp either tac help or tac h, which is an alias, you'll see we wind up with a nice set of descriptions as far as available options or parameters, command line flags, a description, and example and subgenerators are listed out here specifically for the app subgenerator. So you can see that out of the box we get two, skip install, skip cache, which can override most of my logic. Help is out of the box as well. Otherwise we have name, base theme, starter resources, or skip, which is rather Boolean in nature, specifying any plugins such as extension library, ODA. So these literal values will equate and be converted to the actual package value. Whether or not to use Bower or skip it, whether or not to use the npm scripts I mentioned or skip them. And more importantly, if you're working with an existing project and your on-disk project is not, quote, ODP, you can use this to, without any of the other components, update the on-disk project path to some on-disk project path and skip the app initialization. This will make sure that your local instance of your on-disk project will pick up a file that registers and knows where we're talking about. So if you go to use any of the subgenerators, such as being, class, etc., it knows where to put those files. So let's look at what I just created here. I removed the previous demo and I'm into the demo 2, and I have some amazing on-disk project, which is my ODP in this case. So obviously it doesn't know anything about this on-disk project. So yo xsp tac p some amazing ODP tac s. This will perform the setup, and once it's complete, okay, so I'm working off of my development copy, which is why it's showing that. There is a notification that will pop up if you're not running the latest, and it prompts you with what the command is, which is pretty awesome. So what just showed up is not actually a regular file, but it's a shadow file. So if we go into that EORC, which is created for your benefit for this sort of association, and to remember your prompts, etc. Say you have extension library enabled in one project but not another. It remembers the values, such as this, meaning when I run a subgenerator, I can check for that value and not have to prompt you for it every time. If it doesn't exist, it'll obviously default to something, but that's all it takes to register for an existing ODP. This should help ease a lot of people's concerns if they don't happen to have their OnDisk project named exactly what I named it. So this hopefully shows as being rather flexible in nature. Also, this OnDisk project is one that I've listed with a surprising number of resource elements, just so I can kind of demo a couple of things. But here we are. So say I wanted to work off of this OnDisk project. I'll set up an example here shortly, and then I will show you how to use the other subgenerators. So you can see I've changed directory back to that first project directory. And you can see also that file, that EORC file, exists here. If I look in it, you can see I've saved almost every single one of the values that we set from the prompts. And this is, again, for reference later on. If you need to update something, you can by all means do so, or if something got mangled or misinput, you can update it there. The get attributes is something that is included as part of the generator, and that is to associate files via linguist to the quote XPages language on GitHub. Now, say I have my files already ready to go. Git status shows I have a lot of green staged files in Git. So say this is a working application, and I know I want to add another XPage. Well, we know from looking at EOXSP-H that there is an XPage subgenerator. So if I do XPage help, it will tell me the help information just for that subgenerator. And you can see aside from this boilerplate stuff, it takes a name. So I can use either the command line flags to skip the prompts, or I can say just go for it with the prompts. And you'll see that if I can quit fat fingering my keyboard, that it will actually work. So since it was not put in a command line flag, we're going to be prompted for a name. I'm going to call it something imaginative like stuff. So, okay, it created stuff.xsp in the XPages path of your OnDisk project. If I go look at it, you can see it looks a lot like an XPage with nothing in it. The same is true of a custom control, but what were some of those other ones that we had available to us? We have XPage, custom control, which is CC, class, which is relatively straightforward. It does prompt whether or not you want to have it implement serializable. On top of that, we also have a separate one for bean, which will register it with your face's config file, giving it prompting for scope, etc. You know what? Why explain when I can just show you? So Pascal case, upper camel case. It also means that if you want to give it to some package name, such as that, and then my bean, to type it in. If you leave off everything before just the class name, it will assume a default application path for package. So I'm going to say this is going to be a view scoped bean. And so you can see git status that I have an OnDisk project code Java com myco app mybean, and here it is. So since we're using the extension library, it imports the extension library utility. That's specifically for being able to return a get current instance on the actual bean itself. Since this is within an NSF and we're using extension library, this guarantees that we'll get the one instance it could be for our session. Otherwise, it's got a default blank constructor. It's got a name, which myBean was the name of it, so it's a myBean bean. You obviously can go tweak this after the fact, so you wanted to drop this just down to myBean. And otherwise it implements serializable and has a default serial version UID. As for the faces config, that file has been updated to have a managed bean block, and it's set with the class accordingly. View scope, myBean bean. Now, one of the things I have on my wish list of things to tackle later on is to prettify how the actual XML gets updated. Right now it updates correctly, but doesn't always look the best once it's updated. If it creates new from one of the template files, it looks pretty good. But like I said, some of the updates tend to mangle things. So let's get to one of the more complicated ones. Yo XSP REST. Now, I highlighted earlier briefly that my intention for this is to default to relatively normal XPages, quote, normal way of doing things. So while I'm known for having done a series on HTTP servlets, which are implementations of designer faces servlets in the NSF, this focuses on using a custom service bean with the extension library REST service control. So, endpoint I'd like to use, say I have a junk drawer. I keep random things in it. I'm going to say application JSON, and you can see it creates out 2 files. So now if I were to create another thing, so instead of a junk drawer, say I have a cutlery drawer, I can go ahead and say, instead of junk, cutlery, again, JSON personally, and instead of creating, the API.xsp has been updated. So let's take a look at one of these. The class itself is relatively normal, and I'm going to open that up actually and show it to you this way. Okay, so as you can see, it's a bean, has a class name, it extends custom service bean. And some of the things that trip people up when you try and go manual with some of these approaches to a RESTful endpoint is some of the need to set things. So you could do a custom service control and go the SSJS route in it without a custom service bean, and just hand jam in the control itself paths to things for like what to do on a get, what to do on a put, a post, that sort of a thing. However, I like the custom service bean because we get far more control over the methods and the entire process involved. So that being said, I'm including an enum of methods of everything most people should run into. Content type. This string array is what's allowed out of the box. It's get and options. And why is that? Because for CORS purposes, you may have an options thrown your way to see what's available before people actually perform the get. It's common for anything not of the same domain. Render service here is doing the normal consumption, and then also I'm doing my method check of what we're talking about, and then go ahead and do whatever else. Out of the box, just get does its thing. Post, put, delete, options, get and options do their thing. Everything else defaults currently to do unhandled. Here, do delete actually calls do unhandled. So again, out of the box, the print writer actually outputs a string of text which will be registered as application JSON by the browser of hello world from this bean. So that one step better than hello world out of the box, and honestly, anything beyond that would probably be too opinionated for a normal application here. And this one is set up almost identically. Obviously, it came from the same template file. So as far as that goes, that's pretty decent. Actually, the API XSP I'll show you next. So you can see here we've got the 2 XE REST service controls, and again that update slight mangling is going on, but it is functional and works. All you'd have to do is open it up and do your Control Shift F for it to look fun again or correct again. You can see they're setting correctly to application JSON. They are for request content type and content type. The service bean is identified. Otherwise, it's very, very light. It's just a wiring up of the service to the class at an endpoint. So path info and state is false out of the box. So I do believe this to be a pretty legitimately useful item. So if I want to get diff, okay. So that's it for the sub generators. Now that we have a slightly more complete picture of what all we can do with this, we can create from scratch, update existing, and create either a full application base or individual parts thereof using some predefined configurations. This is going to result in an on-disk project you can import to Domino Designer, and if you need help with that, by all means check out that NotesIn9 episode 131. But it is an arbitrary task. Most modern developers on Domino should be using source control of some variety, whether it's Mercurial or Git. This really doesn't matter when it comes to importing. And you should hopefully be able to import, and if you haven't yet, perhaps it's time to take the opportunity and give it a go. This project is open source. It's freely available. It's on GitHub. You can fork it, create your own version of things. You can contribute back with a pull request. You can report issues. You can report on the issue tracker features if you would like. You can see out here I have a couple of things, one of which is in progress. That's this video. I have, like I mentioned, that XML one, and then also preferred path for some of the tests I want to have a little bit cleaner. So if you want a feature requested, by all means hit new issue. If you want to report a bug because you ran into something and hey, it's open source, you get what you pay for, well, by all means, please put an issue out here, and I will do my best to try and get it taken care of, provided it isn't too crazy. And like I said, it's pretty easy to contribute back. I'd be more than happy to walk anyone through the steps needed. There's a contributing guide out here, so if you need help getting started, this should walk you through it. And this is actually a pretty good segue into my next item. So while working on this, I also noticed that in my continuous integration environment, where I perform a build using Headless Designer of a Domino NSF, that I wanted a little bit more of a seamless transition with I'm using a couple of node-based dependencies with my application. And this is just for some of the dependency management and some of the processing tasks because I happen to really like Node. And I'm a little bit tired of having to do a lot of custom configurations on the CI implementation side of things. So the more I can keep in the dependency level for the project, the better. So Cameron Gregor's project Dora is pretty awesome. More awesome is Swiper, which is a plugin to Domino Designer. And because my largest app at the day job is so phenomenally large, I have trouble keeping build automatically turned on for it. If I do, usually the first 15 minutes of my day with Designer opening up, when I open up that NSF, it is going to chug kind of perpetually. And honestly, it became enough of a problem that I turned it off and I haven't looked back. So it's currently, as of FP7 and below, on 901, Swiper, to my knowledge, is not able to work with manual other than manually clicking on the design elements and selecting Swiper clean. This also means that on the continuous integration side of things, when I perform a Headless Designer build of an NSF, I want to run something either that is Dora or like Dora, which is really just a bunch of XSLT transforms on my source code to enforce it beforehand. I've gotten burned in the past a couple of times on mangled metadata between my committing into source control and not, and switching between branches, and Domino not picking up on the difference in version, so the built NSF doesn't match what was in source control. If you are swiping, using Swiper to clean, or using Dora as part of the Git hooks, that means that it will be taken care of, thankfully. But if you're like me and you got burned once, you said to yourself, never again. So again, I like a lot of node dependencies. This means that I can do it all out of the box in one place. So I have creatively named node-dora. Now, the node prefix is partly because on NPM, just Dora is a different project. But it also doesn't really matter too much because there's a project dependent on this that I actually perform the install on, because this is just the wrapper and exposes a very simplified API for what to do. And you can see here I have a submodule in Git for development purposes. In the live npm install, it doesn't actually clone down with that submodule, but I do have in my install script something which does about that. So what I use as a dependency is the node-dora CLI tool. And that means that in my package JSON out of the box, I have one dependency I need to actually install. So node-dora performs a wrapping of Dora for node package purposes. And then on top of that, I have the Dora CLI package, which implements it and exposes it so it can be easily added to a project. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So I'm in my second app again. I have my Some Amazing Ondas project. You can see I have my YO file looking at it. So if I look at that, I'm going to copy this out real quick. I'll just come up later. So npm init gives me a package JSON. I should have said yes. So this is going to take all my default prompts. My package JSON, you'll see in here I have scripts. I currently have no dependencies set, no description, but otherwise you can see it just kind of works. So I perform an npm install tacd or tac save dev. So it's a dependency, but it's a development dependency. Dora CLI. Once that's done, you'll see that it installed everything it needs in one shot. So my packages.json has only one dependency listed, which is quite handy, keeps things nice and clean. And in scripts, as I mentioned in the README here, you can set up a clean task of now the command Dora, which is only accessible within the node runtime as a dependency for the project. So if I say Dora, I give it single quotes there, clean, you'll see that this is now available as an npm script. So just because you have node and npm scripts available on a project does not make it a node project. You're not running within a node execution context for your actual production app. You're just doing some basically pre-processing. So if you're using any sort of tooling like Bower, you're already using a node-based tool or Browserify or Webpack. The only real difference here is we've just specified it inside of the package JSON as an npm script. So if I run, I'm going to get init first. Okay. Now that I've got that, that means that I should be able to pick up on the unstaged changes from my npm clean script. So npm run clean. So from that scripts block, npm run will run any one of those. Now, like I had mentioned, this is a rather large file set. You'll also notice my little spinner here, which I have a little issue out there on that project, is currently blocking. You'll see, though, that XSLT is processing using the XSLT file from Dora and is performing rather quickly a lot. Now, interesting bit of trivia. The reason this blocks is because, and there's an issue out there, it is being held up because of a synchronous operation. Reading from a file and writing to a file are always synchronous, even if you wrap them in an async or wrapper type method. So you can see here, I just processed 1,769 files that matched the requirements for running Dora. So I think you can see the usefulness of this, certainly within certain contexts. This may not be for everyone. If you can turn Swiper on and use it with build automatically, I recommend you do. In the future, there may be some improvements that will mean I'm able to have that on by default, and that will be excellent. Until then, I do have a solution that helps, and it's installable from a single dependency, and that means that if I install it on my CI machine and then adjust, say, my npm install to actually do the install from cache, I could potentially eliminate much of the install time, which is only so long. But to make a long story short, these are a couple of tools that can help you out. They certainly will help me out, so if nothing else I've gained from the experience, if they help other people out, I believe that's worthwhile as well. If you see a use, a need, or just want to help tidy things up, by all means help contribute. Also, you can catch me on GitHub. I have an Ask Me Anything repository, a little bit light on things at the moment. There have been a couple of questions that I've answered outside of that forum, but by all means, if you got questions, how I approached this project or the other project, I mean, almost anything is fair game. Just make it so that my mother could actually read it and not be embarrassed for me. That being said, thank you for watching. I hope you're working on expanding your skill set and your tool set beyond just, say, Notes Domino development. That doesn't mean you have to give up on anything from Notes and Domino or XPages. It does mean that we can learn more from the greater involvement and the learning experience involved. Until next time, let's build better apps.
And that was a demo, and I thank Eric for his time and for his contribution. If you want to reach out to the NotesIn9 team, this is the contact information. And thank you for your time.